Thursday. Can't get used to this Tuesday, Thursday timetable for this class. We'll finish chapter 3 next Tuesday. Okay? And I'm not even going to try sharing the screen with the PowerPoint because that wasn't working again yesterday, so I'm just going to set it up within the classroom. Okay, let's review the idea of a rate limiter. Can anyone describe to me what they remember about a rate limiter from Tuesday? Great. Can you remember what the rate limiter does at the beginning of the lifespan?
No, ma'am, I was struggling with this part.
You were struggling with this part? Okay, well that's good. All right, you need to tell me if that's the case, because now I'll go over it again, okay? All right, so let's review rate limiters. So a rate limiter is an individual constraint because it is connected to the development of the different systems within our bodies. All right? So we have the skeletal system, we have the muscular system, we have the digestive system, we have the sexual organs and the sex system, and we've got the cardiovascular system, and they all develop at different rates when we're looking at younger individuals, okay? So the rate limiter is the constraint, is the system that is developing the slowest with regards to the achievement of a particular skill, all right? So if I want, let's go back to the video clips we were looking at yesterday. We were looking at the young boy who appeared to have a small flight phase when he pushed off one leg when he was running, but no flight phase at all when he pushed off his left foot. Remember that? So in that case, the rate limiter for him achieving a more appropriate running pattern would be strength in his legs, all right? So it would be the muscular system, and strength would be the rate limiter in that particular instance. So it depends what the task is, what the skill is that you're asking the individual to do, and it depends where they are in their developmental track, all right? If we get into puberty, we have a similar situation, because one of the things that happens in puberty, as we'll look at in a bit more detail, is that the skeletal system goes into overdrive much earlier than the muscular system does. So quite often what you see in young teenagers who are going through puberty is they suddenly shoot up, like they get tall, or their arms get long, or their legs suddenly get all long and gangly. And a skill that they could do previously is now quite difficult for them, because it takes a long time for the muscular system to develop, to be strong enough to manage all this extra bone weight and these extra levers that this individual has suddenly developed. in a relatively short time, right? Puberty, the growth spurt that in the skeleton in puberty is a relatively short period of time. It's almost like overnight. It's someone who was this size is suddenly this size, okay? So again, at that point, strength on the muscular system would be possibly a rate limiter for certain skills. At the other end of the lifespan, all right, what we have is a situation where instead of it being the slowest system to develop that holds the skill back, when we get to being quite elderly, now what we see is it's the first system that deteriorates to a critical point whereby that person can no longer perform a skill. Right? So, for example, a lot of older people have bad arthritis in their hands, and they can no longer undo the jar of peanut butter, right? So the deterioration in the joints, in the skeletal system, prevents them performing a skill that they've been able to do all their life. Does that help, Raylan?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah? To make it a bit clearer. In the chapter, I know some of you don't have your books yet, but in the chapter, what you'll find that the new book is really nicely laid out, okay? So they have question marks, orange circle question marks, and they give you a thought or a question to think about, how do I apply? So for example, in the part of the chapter that is talking about rate limiters, the question is, in your experience, what rate limiters have affected your motor behavior? And how have these changed at different points in your life? Right? So, you might not be able to remember back, you almost certainly can't remember back to when you started walking, started running, started reaching. But think about what happened when you were in PE in school, or you started your specific sport that you take part in, all right? Can you think of a rate limiter that might have affected your achievement of a particular skill? Right? The more you do that, the more you connect the information from class to your own personal experience, the easier it is to follow what they're trying to show us. Right? If we can make it as personal as possible. I mean, I can stand here all day and give you examples about gymnastics, because that's my background. But you guys aren't gymnasts. So my stories, whilst I think they're great examples of the material, right, maybe don't help you as much as if you could think of a particular instance within your own sport. Right? So try to do that as you're listening to class, as you're reading the textbook. And what would be really super would be if you think of a great example that you managed to apply material to yourself, turn your microphone on and share that aha moment, right, with everybody else. Because the more examples we have, the better understanding we will get. Okay? Anybody else got questions about rate limiters? All right, so I said that we were just going to finish off the other kind of sub-group of work that's under the ecological perspective. It's based on perception action. So perception action, the term gives us the idea of a coupling of these two things, right? So perception and action, movement, are coupled together. We can't really do one without the other, okay? And so in the research world, people have come to a point where they think about perception and action as evolving together, right? They're so intrinsically entwined, that we can't look at one without the other, okay? The work on perception action was originally started a long time ago, back in the 1960s and 1970s, but it took 20 years or so before people really picked up on that work and continued the idea of it, right? So we want to be thinking of the fact that the individual is an active explorer of the environment, particularly if it's a child, because children are inherently inquisitive, right? Humans are inherently inquisitive. The problem is that the school system tends to squash it a little bit, because you're not allowed to ask questions. You just have to memorize things that are dumped in front of you at the moment. So we're kind of taught not to be inquisitive, which is a real shame, I think, because when we're exploring, we learn a lot more than when we're just dumped, right? So movement then, the exploration of the environment, plays a critical role in the development of my perception of the environment, all right? Because the more I move, the more diverse stimuli I receive, okay? And the interesting thing about perception is it's a very individual point of view, right? No one can tell me what I do or don't perceive, which I always think is quite interesting. And when we look at the development of perception, there's some really, as an adult, we don't even think about things like this, all right? But for example, the door to the classroom is over in the corner there, okay? So from where I'm standing, I can't see what is outside of the classroom, all right? So if I couldn't move, right, if a alien came down and their body wasn't capable of moving with the action of gravity, that alien wouldn't know that this room wasn't the world, right? Because in order to know there's something out there, I have to be able to walk over there and look out the door, right? It's a bit of a silly example, but, okay? I can't learn about objects unless I can move around objects. And once I understand the object, it changes how I move with that object, right? So there's this continual back and forth between our perception of our environment and our movement within our environment. So, perception action theory says that we directly perceive information from the environment. So I can see it, or I can hear it, or I can feel it, okay? And that perception, perceiving is experiencing, rather than in information processing, I don't have to have a response to that perception. The perception runs through the computer and the response is chucked out. Okay? So a term that we see a lot is this term affordance. All right? So I'm going to go through what affordances are. All right? And I want you to think carefully about this because next week in class it would be good to continue with chapter 3. So if you need me to run through the idea of affordances more than once today, just let me know. Okay? So an affordance occurs in an environment, and it's to do with the perception that the individual has that that environment offers him. So if there's an object, what function does that object play? If there's a space, what could I do in that space? Okay? And again, it's very personal because it's based on my perception of the environment and myself. And so my body size, my body shape, my self-esteem might all play a role in how I perceive that environment. Okay? So I'll give you an example and then we'll come back to the idea of body scaling. All right? And again, the example is based on my experience, so try to think, okay, that's her example, what would my example be based on my experience? Okay? So when I fly back from visiting my family, it's a really long flight. It's almost 10 hours coming back from London to Dallas, say. So you're kind of stuck. I mean, they do let you get up and move around on the plane, but there's not a lot of room, right? At least, I don't know what it's like in first class. I can't afford first class. In cattle class, where I have to sit, right, there's not a lot of room. So when I get off the plane, I'm really excited to be able to move and walk and stretch out and get my body kind of feeling a little more comfortable. In Dallas, when you get off the plane, you're faced with having to go upstairs to the next level to go to immigration, right? So when you get off the plane, you are faced with an elevator, what do you call a moving staircase? Escalator, or a flight of stairs. All right? So I always find it very interesting to watch what other people are doing because I immediately go to the flight of stairs because I want to move my body. Right? That same exact environment, the environment doesn't change, people's perception of the environment change. It always amazes me how many people use the escalator, right? So they've been stationary for 10 hours, and then given that environment, their perception is, oh, I'm tired, or that flight of stairs is really long, or my bag is heavy, and they stand on the escalator. All right? And then people who are in wheelchairs or who have other movement issues will use the elevator. Okay? So it depends upon the individual's interpretation of what the environment affords them to do. Okay? Now, often that affordance is linked to the idea of my dimensions in regards to the environment, okay? So we call this body scaling. All right? So if you watch a small child go up a flight of stairs, the movement pattern you are likely to see is either going up on hands and knees, or if they're a bit more confident, they'll go up one step at a time and maybe hold on to the handrail or the wall. Right? They don't do that because they can't walk up one foot after the other. The problem is that the height of the stair, the rise of the stair, in relation to the length of their legs at that age, does not afford them the opportunity to go up 1 foot at a time. Right? So it's not until they grow a little bit and their legs get longer and the ratio of their leg length to the rise of the stair changes that we see a change in the movement pattern. Right? We can also body scale PE and sport equipment. And that's a really key point to getting people engaged in practicing skills. Because if I give someone a ball and the only basket they have to shoot in is in the gym, but they're this tall, right? They might not be very successful. If I can body scale the net, the basketball net, right, bring it down, then they're going to be more successful and they'll want to keep practicing. Does that make sense? So affordance then is the opportunity for action that an object or an environment provides to an individual. Right? And it depends upon that individual's developmental level, their past experiences and therefore their perception of that object or that environment, the present need that they have, and also their awareness of the opportunity. Okay? So if I present someone with a brand new environment or a brand new object that they've never seen before, they might not know what to do with it. Right? Or they may develop their own games. One of the funniest things that I ever saw was when I first started working on my PhD in Alabama, and we had some hockey sticks for the children on the playground. And the children were anywhere from 2 to 5. And we had these hockey sticks that had big, soft, foam ends on them, right? And so we laid them out on the playground. And of course, our expectation as the adult was that they would pick up the hockey stick and hit the ball, right? And that wasn't what happened. What would happen was the kids would pick up the hockey stick and they would walk around the playground going, bzzz, because they interpreted the hockey stick as a leaf blower. Because everybody has leaf blowers in Alabama because there are tons of trees and piles of leaves, it's lovely, right? Kids over here wouldn't do that because they've probably never seen a leaf blower because there aren't any trees, right? So, you know, the interpretation of what the object can do is based upon the individual's experiences and perception. Questions? examples. What are you thinking about right now? Other than, oh, it's time for a coffee.
The leaf blower.
The leaf blower. It was funny, I'll tell you. It was very funny. But it was a real wake-up call to the adults, you know, because we had set all these toys out and we had very particular ideas of the motor skills that we were going to be practicing with these toys. The children had a whole different set of ideas. It was a very eye-opening experience, I have to say. It was good. I learned a lot. Okay. So I'm going to finish up here. So the ecological umbrella then, the ecological approach or perspective. Both branches, whether it's dynamical systems or perception action, do not consider the central nervous system as the governor of the movement, all right? So they both look at the idea that the body is going to organize a movement pattern around the environment and the task that it's working with, all right? So if I'm walking on, if I'm walking down the road in Portales, then I'm likely to step in a hole, right? and there isn't time for that sensory information to go all the way up to the brain, for the brain to make a decision, send all that information all the way down, for me not to fall over when I go down the hole, right? So from an ecological perspective, the body self-organizes itself based upon those constraints, all right? That's quite a difficult concept to get your head around, I think. It's a little subtle, but we'll be practicing it a lot this semester. So stick with it, okay? Let me give you a sport example. So if I am based in information processing, all right, and I look at someone catching a ball, then my ideas about how that occurs, how that person catches a ball, are based on the fact that the brain does a lot of calculations given the stimulus information that it receives, and it puts the person into the right place to catch the ball. Okay? Because that was my background, that's very attractive to me. It's relatively simple to understand, right? And, you know, you see the ball, the brain does its processing, it picks a hand-catching movement pattern, and it programs the muscles and the skeleton to put the hands up and catch the ball, right? That's a nice way of looking at it, I think. And it's not wrong, it's just different to what the ecological perspective would say, where we would say that catching the ball is a result of moving your eyes, your head, your body, which provides lots of different optical flow information for the eyes and the nervous system, and helps you to judge space and time, right? Often I think, you know what, information processing is more about what is happening in the brain to initiate the movement, and ecological perspective is more about the organization and control of what is happening in the peripheral of the body. That's just my own personal way of trying to think about, rather than have them competing as theories, I like to think of them as complementary to each other rather than antagonistic to each other. So, there we have chapter 2. Right? So again, make use of your web study guide. There are labs there that are geared towards helping you understand this information. All right? There's some learning exercises at the back of the chapter to help you understand. They're all good study tools. All right? They're not assignments, but the more you use those kinds of activities, the deeper your understanding of the information will be. Okay? Okay. Ideas? Questions? Anything about chapter 2 that you want me to do a bit more of?
No, I think I'm good.
You're okay? All right.
Yes, ma'am.
So let's take 3 to 5 minutes right now, because I need to change the PowerPoint over within the classroom setup. So if you need a loose stop or anything like that, do that while I'm changing this over, because I'm not quite sure. Haven't done this